For 872 days, survival meant finding food where none existed. This is the story of Leningrad, a city under siege, where the greatest battle was not against bullets, but against an enemy you couldn't see: starvation. How did a city of nearly 3 million people survive one of the longest and most destructive sieges in history? The answer lies in ingenuity, unimaginable sacrifice, and a frozen lifeline known as the Road of Life. On September 8, 1941, the final land link to the city of Leningrad was severed by German forces. The plan was simple and brutal: not to storm the city, but to encircle it and starve its population into submission. Hitler himself declared that Leningrad was to be wiped from the face of the earth. The city, a jewel of Russian culture and industry, was now a trap. As the Iron Ring tightened, food supplies dwindled with terrifying speed. Rations were slashed again and again. At the peak of the famine in late 1941, the daily bread ration for a civilian was a mere 125 grams, a small, dense slice made mostly of sawdust, cellulose, and whatever else could be found to add bulk. It was barely enough to sustain life. People boiled leather belts and shoes to create a gelatinous broth. They stripped wallpaper to scrape the edible paste from underneath. The city's parks and gardens were dug up for any roots or plants that could be eaten. The silence in the streets was deafening, broken only by the wail of air raid sirens and the rumble of distant artillery. People were too weak to speak, conserving every ounce of energy simply to stay alive. The public transport stopped running, not just from lack of fuel, but because drivers would collapse from hunger at the wheel. The dead were left in their homes or on the streets, as their loved ones were too weak to carry them to cemeteries. This was the reality for hundreds of thousands of people. Yet, in this landscape of utter despair, a glimmer of hope emerged. As winter descended, the vast Lake Ladoga, to the east of the city, began to freeze over. This frozen expanse was Leningrad's only potential connection to the outside world. Engineers and soldiers worked frantically in the bitter cold, testing the thickness of the ice. On November 20th, 1941, the first horse-drawn sleds made the perilous journey across the lake, carrying sacks of flour. Soon after, trucks began to follow. This treacherous route, constantly shelled and bombed by the Germans, became known as the Road of Life. It was anything but safe. The ice could crack at any moment, swallowing vehicles and their precious cargo whole. Drivers navigated in near-total darkness to avoid enemy planes, often getting lost in blizzards. Many never made it. Yet, for every truck that sank, more would follow. These drivers, many of them young men and women, were heroes. They knew that with every bag of flour, they were delivering not just food, but hope. On the return journey, the trucks didn't travel empty. They carried the most vulnerable out of the city: the children, the sick, and the exhausted factory workers essential for the war effort. Over 1 million people were evacuated via the Road of Life, a mass exodus from a dying city. While the Road of Life was the city's main artery, it wasn't the only way food got in. Small clandestine operations were just as vital. Fishermen in small boats would risk navigating the lake's waters under the cover of darkness. Brave individuals would sneak through gaps in the German lines, carrying what little they could on their backs. Every potato, every loaf of bread smuggled into the city was a victory. Scientists at the All-Union Institute of Plant Industry protected a priceless collection of seeds and tubers, tons of rice, wheat, and potatoes, from both the starving citizens and the rats. They saw it as their duty to preserve these genetic resources for the future of agriculture, even as they themselves starved to death at their posts. It was an act of incredible foresight and sacrifice. The story of Leningrad is one of unimaginable suffering, but it is also one of the most profound testaments to human endurance. People found strength in community. They shared their minuscule rations. Musicians, starving and freezing, performed symphonies in unheated halls to lift the spirits of the people. Dmitri Shostakovich's Leningrad Symphony, composed during the siege and broadcast through loudspeakers across the front lines, became an anthem of defiance. It told the enemy and the world that the spirit of Leningrad was not broken. For 872 days, the people endured. They worked in factories, producing weapons for the front line, often collapsing from exhaustion at their posts. They looked out for their neighbors, they clung to art and culture, and they refused to surrender. When the siege was finally lifted on January 27, 1944, the city was a ghost of its former self. Over 1 million civilians had perished, the vast majority from starvation. But Leningrad had survived. The story of how they fed their starving city is not just about a road across a frozen lake. It's about the countless small acts of courage, the unwavering resilience of the human spirit, and the refusal to give up hope in the face of absolute darkness. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story as moving as I did, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more incredible stories from history. See you next time.